The Bond We Broke, an Omegaverse novel, Chapter 1. The Scent of Rain. A flower shop on Wren Street smelled like peonies and possibility. Ethan Calloway hummed softly as he trimmed the stems of a fresh delivery, his fingers quick and practiced despite the ache in his lower back. It was barely 7 in the morning, and the early autumn light filtered through the shop's wide windows, painting the wooden floors in streaks of gold. Outside, the city of Ashford was waking up, honking taxis, the distant rumble of the subway, the clatter of heels on wet pavement from last night's rain. He loved this hour, the quiet before the chaos, the world still soft and unformed like clay waiting to be shaped. "Going to be late for the order, sweetheart," called a voice from the back room. "Never late, Nana," Ethan called back, smiling. "I'm precisely on time. You're precisely cutting those dahlias like you've got all day." "The Harrington wedding isn't going to decorate itself," Ethan laughed, a warm melodic sound that seemed to brighten the already golden room. He tucked a strand of honey-blonde hair behind his ear and glanced at his reflection in the shop window. 26 years old, slight build, freckles scattered across the bridge of his nose like flecks of cinnamon. Hazel eyes that his grandmother always said looked like sunlight through autumn leaves. He was pretty for an Omega. He'd heard that his whole life, usually from people who meant it as a compliment, and sometimes from people who meant it as something else entirely. The bell above the door chimed. Ethan looked up and the world tilted. The man who walked into rose and thorn florals was not the kind of man who usually walked into flower shops. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that filled the doorframe and a presence that seemed to suck the air from the room. Dark hair swept back and slightly damp from the drizzle outside, a jaw that could have been carved from marble. Eyes so dark they were almost black, framed by lashes that would have been pretty on anyone else, but on him just looked dangerous. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Ethan's rent. Charcoal grey, perfectly tailored with a tie the colour of midnight. His watch caught the light, platinum understated, the kind of accessory that whispered money rather than screamed it, and his scent. Ethan's breath caught, rich, dark, like aged whiskey and cedar smoke, and something deeper, something primal and territorial that made every Omega instinct in Ethan's body sit up and pant. Alpha, not just any alpha, a powerful one. The kind whose scent carried the weight of dominance and command, whose pheromones announced him before he even opened his mouth. The man's eyes swept the shop with the cool efficiency of someone accustomed to sizing up rooms and people in seconds. They passed over the flower arrangements, the glass cases, the vintage cash register. And then they landed on Ethan. Something shifted. It was subtle. A fractional widening of those dark eyes, a slight flare of his nostrils, a tension that hadn't been there before, pulling taut across his shoulders like a wire being wound. He stared at Ethan. Ethan stared back. Neither of them moved. The man's voice came out rougher than expected. He cleared his throat. "I need flowers." Ethan blinked. His heart was doing something ridiculous in his chest, hammering and fluttering and aching all at once. His scent, he realized with a flush of horror, was doing exactly what it shouldn't be doing, blooming outward like a flag being raised, sweet and warm and unmistakably Omega. "Oh no, no. Flowers," Ethan repeated, his voice embarrassingly breathy. "Right, yes, we have those, flowers in a flower shop, that's yes." Corner of the man's mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite, but something close. "I'm hosting a charity gala this Saturday," the man said, stepping closer to the counter. Each step was deliberate, measured, the kind of walk that belonged to someone who had never once doubted his right to take up space. "I need centerpieces, 200 of them." Ethan's brain short-circuited. 200, is that a problem? No, that's a fantastic order. That's the best order we've had in forever. Let me get my grandmother. She handles the big contracts." Ethan turned toward the back room, his cheeks burning, his pulse racing. He could feel the alpha's eyes on him, could feel them like a physical touch, tracing the line of his spine, the curve of his neck where his scent glands sat just beneath the skin. "Don't turn around. Don't turn around. Don't." He turned around. The man was still watching him. And this time there was no mistaking the look in those dark eyes. It was hunger. Not the crude, leering kind Ethan had encountered too many times, something deeper. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Your name," the man said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand wrapped in silk. "Ethan," he breathed. "Ethan Calloway." Something flickered behind the man's eyes, something raw and startled and young, a crack in that impenetrable facade. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Damien," he said finally. "Damien Blackwood." Name hit Ethan like a splash of cold water. Blackwood, as in Blackwood Industries. As in the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that owned half of Ashford. As in the most powerful alpha in the city, possibly the country, was standing in his grandmother's flower shop, looking at him like he was the only thing in the room. "I should." Ethan gestured vaguely toward the back. "Nana, wedding, stems." He fled. Behind him, he heard a sound that might have been a laugh, low and warm and utterly devastating. Damien Blackwood didn't leave for 45 minutes. He stood at the counter while Nana Rose emerged from the back, flower-dusted and sharp-eyed, and proceeded to discuss flower arrangements with the precision of a general planning a campaign. Ethan hovered nearby, pretending to organize the refrigerated display case while stealing glances at the man who had somehow turned a Tuesday morning into something that felt like the opening scene of a movie. Damien was different with Nana Rose. softer, more patient. He listened as she described the difference between garden roses and spray roses, asked thoughtful questions about color palettes, and when she made a joke about alphas and their need to impress, he actually laughed, a real laugh, sudden and bright, that transformed his face from intimidating to devastating. Ethan knocked over a vase of lilies. As Damien was leaving, he paused at the door, turned back. His eyes found Ethan's across the shop, and the air between them went thick and heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. "Be back Thursday," he said. To finalize the arrangements, he left, the bell chimed, the door closed. Ethan stood there holding a wet rag and a broken stem, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Sweetheart," Nana Rose said from behind him, her voice gentle and knowing. "That man didn't come here for flowers." Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy pressing his hand to his chest, trying to hold in the thing that was blooming there, wild and terrifying and beautiful, like a flower he hadn't planted but couldn't bring himself to uproot. Oh, he thought dimly. Oh, I'm in trouble. Chapter 2. Gravity. Damien Blackwood had not slept in 3 days. He sat behind the mahogany desk in his corner office on the 47th floor of Blackwood Tower, staring at a spreadsheet that might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian for all the sense it was making. His CFO was talking, something about quarterly projections and market volatility, but the words dissolved into static before they reached his brain. All he could think about was honey blonde hair and freckles, and the scent of white peonies and morning rain, mate. The word had ambushed him in the flower shop, striking with the force of a freight train. He'd felt it the moment he walked through that door, a pull so deep and so immediate that it bypassed his brain entirely and went straight to his bones. His wolf, usually disciplined, controlled, locked behind iron walls of professionalism, had surged forward with a single devastating thought: mine. "Mr. Blackwood, are you listening?" Damien blinked. His CFO, Margaret Chen, was looking at him with the patient exasperation of someone who had worked with him for 8 years and had learned to recognize the signs of a man who had checked out. "Repeat the last part," Damien said. "I said the Sterling Partnership is requesting a meeting. Victoria wants to discuss the merger terms." Something cold flickered behind Damien's eyes. Victoria Sterling, business associate, pack ally, and if she had her way, something considerably more. "Schedule it for next week," he said. "I'm busy Thursday." "Thursday, your calendar is clear. I have a flower order to finalize." Margaret stared at him. "A flower order?" "The Harrington Gala, centerpieces. You have an entire events team for that. I'm handling this one personally." Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, and made a note in her planner with the resigned air of someone who had stopped questioning her boss's eccentricities years ago. Thursday came, Damien dressed with more care than he'd admit. Charcoal slacks, navy sweater, no tie, casual enough to look relaxed, expensive enough to look like he hadn't tried. He rolled the sleeves to his elbows. Studied himself in the mirror, frowned, rolled them back down, frowned again. What am I doing? He was Damien Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries. Net worth $11.3 billion. Forbes cover twice. He'd negotiated hostile takeovers without breaking a sweat, stared down board members twice his age, and built an empire from the ashes of his father's failures. He did not fret about his sleeves. He rolled them back up, grabbed his keys, and left. Rose and thorn florals was exactly as he remembered. Warm, fragrant, impossibly inviting. The kind of place that felt like stepping into a world where time moves slower and kindness wasn't a weakness. Ethan was behind the counter, arranging a bouquet of wildflowers with the focused intensity of a surgeon. He was wearing an oversized cardigan that kept slipping off one shoulder, revealing the curve of his collarbone and a scattering of freckles that Damien's wolf wanted to count. The Omega scent hit him the moment he walked in, sweet and bright and achingly familiar, like coming home to a place he'd never been. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met, and Ethan blushed. The color started at his cheeks and spread outward, painting his freckled skin in shades of rose and coral. His scent spiked, warmth and sweetness and something else, something shy and electric that made Damien's hands tighten at his sides. "Mr. Blackwood," Ethan said, his voice carefully steady. "You're early." "Damien," he corrected, "and I'm precisely on time." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a flash of recognition, as if he'd heard that particular phrasing before. A smile tugged at his lips. "You talked to my grandmother. Mentioned you say that. Mentions a lot of things." Ethan's blush deepened. "She also mentioned you asked about me." Damien felt his own warmth creep up his neck. Nana Rose was, apparently, a woman who understood the art of warfare. "I asked about the shop," he said, which was technically true. He'd also asked about the handsome Omega with the freckles and the gentle hands, but that was beside the point. "Right." Ethan set down the bouquet. "The centerpieces. I have some mock-ups for you to look at." They spent the next hour bent over a table covered in flowers, sketches, and color swatches. Damien, who had expected to be in and out in 15 minutes, found himself drawn into a conversation about the emotional resonance of different floral arrangements, an area he had never once considered and now found inexplicably fascinating. "Roses are obvious," Ethan was saying, holding up a stem. His hands were slender and graceful, dirt beneath his fingernails, a small bandage on his thumb. "Everyone expects roses at a gala." But if you really want people to feel something, he reached for a cluster of small, star-shaped flowers. These, sweet alyssum, they symbolize beauty and delicacy, and their scent, he held them out. Smell, Damien leaned in, the flowers smelled like honey and innocence, but beneath them, closer, warmer, infinitely more intoxicating was Ethan's scent. Up close, it was devastating, vanilla and something citrus bright like lemon blossoms in summer. Damien's wolf went very, very still. Beautiful, Damien murmured, and he wasn't talking about the flowers. Ethan's breath hitched. His eyes, those impossible autumn eyes, lifted to Damien's, and for a moment the world contracted to the space between them. Inches, mere inches. Close enough that Damien could see the rapid flutter of Ethan's pulse at the base of his throat, could count the freckles on his nose, 7, could feel the heat radiating from his skin like sunlight. The bell above the door chimed. They sprang apart like teenagers caught in a closet. A customer walked in, a cheerful beta woman asking about sunflower delivery, and Ethan turned to help her, his face blazing, his scent a symphony of longing and embarrassment. Damien stood by the table of flowers, his heart hammering, his wolf howling inside his chest. Mine, it said again. Mine, mine, mine. He stayed until closing. They began seeing each other outside the shop, not officially, not with the weight of labels or expectations. Just moments, accidental on purpose. Damien would happen to be in the neighborhood around lunchtime and suggest they grab food from the Thai place on the corner. Ethan would coincidentally be walking past Blackwood Tower with an extra coffee. Sugar's right, Ethan said one morning, handing Damien a cup outside his building. He was wearing his cardigan again, the same one Damien had noted, and his nose was pink from the autumn chill. Black, Damien said. I drink it black. Ethan blinked at the cup. Oh, I thought, I'm teasing. Damien took the cup and drank, sweet, perfect. 2 sugars, how did you know? Ethan smiled, a real smile, bright and unguarded, and something inside Damien's chest cracked open like an egg. Your grandmother told me, Damien admitted. She tells everyone everything. Ethan fell into step beside him, their shoulders almost touching. She also told me you have a cat, Brutus. Brutus. He's a Maine Coon. 17 pounds of pure fury and judgment. Ethan laughed, and the sound, God, the sound, warm and round and genuine like bells in a cathedral. Damien's wolf practically purred. He sounds perfect, Ethan said. He's a menace. He knocked my laptop off the desk 3 times last week. Cats don't knock things off desks, they relocate them. There's a difference. Damien looked down at him, this small, bright, beautiful Omega who spoke about cats like they were misunderstood geniuses, and felt something so powerful and so terrifying that it stole his breath. Oh, he thought. So this is what it feels like. The dates became real after that. Dinner at a quiet Italian place where the owner knew Ethan by name and gave Damien a assessing look that said you'd better be worthy of him. A walk along the river at sunset, where Ethan's golden hair caught the dying light and Damien had to physically stop himself from reaching out to touch it. A rainy afternoon in a bookstore, where they sat on the floor between the shelves and Ethan read aloud from a novel about star-crossed lovers, and Damien listened to every word while memorizing the shape of Ethan's mouth, and always, always the pull, the gravity. The invisible thread that drew them closer and closer and closer, until standing near each other felt like standing on the edge of something vast and inevitable. Tell me about your family, Ethan said one evening. They were sitting on a bench in Callaway Park named, Ethan had pointed out with a wry smile, after a distant relative who'd donated the land and promptly gone bankrupt. The city lights reflected off the river in ribbons of gold. Damien was quiet for a moment. My father was complicated, aren't they all? He built Blackwood Industries from nothing, started with a single warehouse and turned it into an empire. But he was, Damien searched for the word, hard, cold. He believed love was a liability. Emotions were weaknesses to be exploited by competitors. Your mother, gentle, quiet, an Omega from a small pack up north. She loved him completely and he, Damien's jaw tightened. He took advantage of that. Used her pack connections for business deals, discarded her when she was no longer useful. Ethan was quiet, then softly, is she still alive? No, she died when I was 12. My father didn't even attend the funeral. Ethan's hand found Damien's on the bench. His fingers were cool and slender, and when they wrapped around Damien's larger ones, something inside Damien went quiet for the first time in years. Sorry, Ethan whispered. Damien looked at their joined hands. Then at Ethan's face, open, earnest, aching with empathy for a man he'd known for only weeks. Don't be, Damien said. It made me who I am. Who is that? Someone who never wanted to be like him. Damien's thumb traced circles on Ethan's palm. Someone who thought love was a trap until he stopped. Ethan breathed. Damien looked at him. The lamplight turned his eyes to liquid gold. His scent, that devastating, intoxicating scent, wrapped around Damien like a vine. Until a flower shop on Wren Street, Damien said quietly. Ethan's breath caught. His lips parted. His pulse fluttered at his throat. And Damien, who had built an empire on control and discipline and the careful suppression of everything soft inside him, leaned forward and pressed his lips to Ethan's. The kiss was gentle, tentative. The barest brush of mouth against mouth, testing, asking, hopping. Ethan made a small sound against his lips. His hand came up to Damien's jaw, fingers trembling, and pulled him closer. And the kiss deepened, slow and sweet and devastating, tasting of espresso and autumn air and the first dangerous bloom of love. When they pulled apart, Ethan's eyes were shining. "Damien," he whispered. "Ethan, I'm terrified." Damien pressed their foreheads together. His wolf was singing, howling with joy and triumph and something deeper, something that felt like home. "So am I," he admitted. "But I think you might be worth it." Ethan laughed, a wet, broken, beautiful laugh, and kissed him again. Chapter 3. Nesting. The first time Ethan brought Damien to his apartment, it was raining. Not a gentle, cinematic drizzle, a full-on downpour that turned the city into a blur of grey and sent them running up 3 flights of stairs, laughing and soaked, their shoes squelching on the worn carpet. "Welcome to my humble abode," Ethan said, pushing open the door with the air of someone presenting a palace. "It's small, but it's perfect," Damien said, and he meant it. Ethan's apartment was tiny. A studio with a kitchen the size of a closet, a bathroom with a temperamental shower, and a living area that doubled as a bedroom. But it was warm, not just in temperature, in spirit. The walls were painted a soft sage green. Fairy lights were strung along the ceiling. Plants crowded every surface, pothos and ferns, and a massive monstera that had clearly won its battle for territorial dominance. And the bed, Damien's breath caught, the bed was a nest. Not the controlled, minimalist space he'd expected, an actual Omega nest. Layers upon layers of soft things, quilts and throws and pillows in every size and texture, arranged in a careful spiral that radiated outward from the center. There were cushions in cream and gold and dusty rose, a weighted blanket in deep burgundy. And woven through it all like a secret language were things that carried Ethan's scent: a worn cardigan, a silk scarf, a small stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been loved to within an inch of its life. Damien's wolf went absolutely still. "Mate's nest," it breathed. "Safe, home, Ethan's cheeks were burning. He was wringing his hands, a nervous habit Damien had catalogued alongside 17 other endearing quirks. "I know it's a lot, it's an Omega thing, the nesting. Don't apologize." Damien's voice came out rougher than intended. He stepped closer. His hand reached out almost of its own accord and touched the edge of a velvet pillow. It was warm, it smelled like Ethan. "It's beautiful." Ethan stared at him. "You're not most alphas think it's. Most alphas are idiots." A startled laugh burst from Ethan. That's not very diplomatic of you, Mr. CEO. "I'm not feeling diplomatic." Damien turned to face him. They were standing close enough that he could see the rain droplets still clinging to Ethan's lashes, could smell his scent spiking with something sweet and nervous and wanting. "I'm feeling like I want to." He stopped himself, pressed his lips together, took a breath. "Like you want to what?" Ethan whispered. "Like I want to bury my face in that nest and breathe you in until I can't smell anything else. Like I want to mark every pillow with my scent so the whole world knows you're taken. Like I want to climb into that impossible, beautiful nest with you and never, ever leave. Like I want to make you dinner," Damien said instead. Ethan blinked, then laughed, a bright, surprised sound that filled the tiny apartment like sunlight. "You can cook. I'm a billionaire. I can do anything." "That's not how cooking works." "It's exactly how cooking works." They made pasta. Badly. Damien burned the garlic. Ethan forgot to salt the water. They ate sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, because the table was covered in plants, and it was the best meal Damien had ever had. "Stay," Ethan said afterward, his voice barely audible. Damien looked at him. Ethan was looking at his hands, his lashes casting shadows on his cheeks, his scent a symphony of hope and fear. "I don't mean," Ethan started, flustered. "I just mean it's raining and your driver is." "Ethan," he looked up. "Yes," Damien said. They slept in the nest. Nothing happened. Nothing needed to happen. They lay in the center of that impossible spiral of softness, facing each other, breathing each other's air. Damien's arm was draped over Ethan's waist, tentative at first, then firmer when Ethan snuggled closer with a contented sigh. Ethan fit against him perfectly, like a key in a lock, like a missing piece clicking into place. "Damien," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with approaching sleep. "Scent, when you're happy, it changes." Damien buried his nose in Ethan's hair. "Peonies and vanilla and rain. How? It gets warmer, like a fire in a fireplace. The kind you want to sit next to." Damien's chest ached. "And what does it smell like now?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "Like home." Damien tightened his arms around him, pressed his lips to the crown of his head. Felt the Omega relax into him completely, boneless, trusting, safe, and knew with absolute certainty that he would burn the world to the ground before he ever let anything hurt this man. He didn't say it. Not yet. The words were too big, too new, too fragile. But he felt them settle into his chest like roots, like anchors, like the first stones of something that would last a lifetime. "I love you," he thought. "God help me, I love you." Outside, the rain hammered against the windows. Inside, 2 men who had been alone for so long held each other in a nest made of velvet and memory, and for the first time in their lives, neither of them felt the cold. Chapter 4. The Poison. Victoria Sterling had been in love with Damien Blackwood since she was 17 years old. It was the kind of love that didn't mellow with time, it fermented, curdled. Became something sharp and toxic and desperate, the kind of love that consumed the person who carried it until there was nothing left but hunger and need, and the bitter certainty that the object of their affection owed them something. She was beautiful. She knew this the way she knew market trends and leverage points, with cool, analytical certainty. Tall, statuesque, with dark hair that fell in perfect waves, and eyes the color of storm clouds. An alpha from one of Ashford's oldest and most powerful packs. She and Damien were a match made in boardrooms, equal in ambition, complementary in strength, destined to merge their empires and produce heirs who would rule the city. That was the plan. Her plan, and then a flower boy had ruined everything. She'd noticed the change in Damien weeks ago. He was distracted, late to meetings, smiling at his phone like a teenager. His scent had shifted, warmer, softer, tinged with an omega sweetness that made Victoria's teeth ache. She'd followed him. Of course she had. And she'd found rose and thorn florals and the pretty little omega with the freckles and the gentle hands, and something inside her had snapped. Making a mistake, she told Damien, cornering him in his office one Tuesday afternoon. Damien didn't look up from his computer. Good afternoon, Victoria, always a pleasure. Omega, Ethan Callaway. She said his name like it tasted bad. Do you know anything about his family? I know everything I need to know. Do you know his father was a gambler, that his mother left when he was 6, that his grandmother's shop is barely solvent, and that he has nothing, no pack, no status, no, Victoria. Damien's voice was quiet, but the command in it was absolute. His alpha power rolled through the room like a wave. Stop, he's using you. Doesn't even know my net worth. Victoria's laugh was sharp as glass. Everyone knows your net worth, Damien. It's on Google. Something flickered in Damien's eyes, a shadow of doubt quickly buried. Victoria saw it, filed it away, planted it. I'm just looking out for you, she said, her voice softening to honey. We've been partners for years, our families have history. I don't want to see you throw everything away for a fling with someone beneath you. He's not beneath me. He's an omega from nothing, Damien. When the board hears about this, when your investors hear about this, get out. Victoria stared at him. His jaw was set, his eyes were ice. But his scent was conflicted, tangled with doubt and anger and something that might have been fear. She smiled, curled her lip, turned and walked out, phase 1 complete. The photographs arrived 3 weeks later. They were in a plain envelope, slipped under the door of Damien's penthouse. No return address, no note. Just a series of images printed on glossy paper, each one more damning than the last. Ethan, in a cafe, laughing with another alpha, Ethan, getting into the alpha's car, Ethan. Through a window, embracing the alpha, arms around his neck, face buried in his shoulder. And the final image, Ethan in the alpha's apartment, sitting on the alpha's couch, the alpha's hand on his knee. Damien's wolf detonated. The photos were grainy. The angles were suspicious. Any rational person would have questioned them, would have noticed the way Ethan's posture was stiff in some shots, uncomfortable in others, would have recognized the alpha as Ethan's cousin, visiting from out of town, would have seen the embrace for what it was, a family greeting, nothing more. But Damien wasn't rational. Not about this, not about Ethan. The photos hit every insecurity he'd buried, every fear his father had beaten into him, every whispered warning about omega manipulation and pack politics, and the danger of loving someone so completely that their betrayal could destroy you. His father's voice echoed in his skull. Love is a weapon, boy, and you just handed him the ammunition. He didn't call Ethan, didn't text, didn't explain. He sat in his penthouse in the dark, surrounded by the ghost of Ethan's scent on his clothes, and let the poison do its work. Ethan knew something was wrong. 3 days without a call, without a text, without a coincidental appearance at the flower shop. The silence was deafening, so loud it drowned out everything else. He tried calling. No answer, texted, read but no response, showed up at Blackwood Tower and was stopped by security. I'm sorry, ma'am, sir. Mr. Blackwood isn't accepting visitors. His orders. Ethan stood in the lobby of that gleaming building, surrounded by marble and glass and the cold, impersonal scent of money, and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He went home, sat in his nest, held the cardigan that still smelled like Damien's cedar and whiskey scent and tried to breathe through the pain. He's just busy, he told himself. He's a CEO. He has a company to run. He'll call. He'll come. A week passed, then 2. And then on a Tuesday, the same day Damien had first walked into his shop, Ethan received a message. Come to Blackwood Tower. 8 p.m. We need to talk. Office was dark when Ethan arrived. Damien was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door, the city lights painting his silhouette in silver and shadow. He didn't turn when Ethan entered, didn't acknowledge him at all. Ethan's heart was in his throat. His scent was a mess, fear and hope and the desperate, aching love that he couldn't seem to turn off no matter how badly it hurt. Damien, what's going on? You haven't called in. I know what you are. Words cut through the silence like a blade. Ethan flinched. What are you talking about? Damien turned. His face was stone. His eyes were black, not the warm, hungry black of desire, but the cold, empty black of someone who had pulled away from everything gentle inside himself. I saw the photos, he said. Photos? What photos? Don't. Damien's voice was sharp. Don't insult my intelligence. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed the envelope from his desk and thrust it at Ethan. The photos spilled across the floor, grainy, damning, false. Ethan stared at them, his blood ran cold. That's Damien, that's my cousin, that's Alex, he was visiting from, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, these are obviously taken out of context. Someone staged this. I don't care. The words hung in the air. Ethan looked up at Damien's face, searching for the man he'd kissed in the park, the man who'd made him pasta on his kitchen floor, the man who'd held him in his nest and whispered home into his hair, and found nothing, just cold, just walls, just the ghost of the cruel, distant alpha that Damien had always been afraid of becoming. You don't mean that, Ethan whispered. I do. Damien's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped. I should have listened to, he stopped, swallowed. This was a mistake, we were a mistake. Ethan's vision blurred, his knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of the desk, his hand shaking, his chest caving in on itself like a building being demolished from the inside. Damien, please, I'm done. Damien turned away, walked back to the window, stared out at the city that he owned and the man that he was throwing away. We're done. Silence was absolute. Ethan stood there for a long moment, long enough to memorize the shape of Damien's back, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, as if he were physically holding himself together. Then he turned, walked to the door, opened it. Damien, he said, his voice raw and broken and barely human. Damien didn't turn. Love you, Ethan said. I loved you. And I need you to know that what you're doing right now, this thing you're becoming, it's not who you are, it's who your father was. Flinch was violent, visible, but Damien still didn't turn. Ethan walked out, the door closed, and in the dark office, surrounded by the fading scent of peonies and vanilla and everything he'd ever wanted, Damien Blackwood pressed his forehead against the cold glass and finally let himself break. But it was too late. Chapter 5. Gone. Ethan left Ashford 3 days later. He told Nana Rose he needed space, told Lily, his younger sister, 22 and fierce as fire, that he was fine. Packed 2 suitcases, sold what he couldn't carry, and boarded a bus to his grandmother's sister's house in a small coastal town called Cedarville, 300 miles from everything he'd known. He didn't tell anyone why, not about the photos, not about the rejection. Not about the way Damien's words had carved themselves into his chest like a knife, leaving wounds that bled every time he breathed. And he didn't tell anyone about the test, the positive pregnancy test. He'd taken it the morning after the rejection in the bathroom of his tiny apartment, with shaking hands and a heart that was already in pieces. 2 lines, clear and unmistakable. He was pregnant, with Damien Blackwood's child. The discovery should have devastated him. Should have made an impossible situation even worse. But standing in that bathroom, holding that small plastic stick, Ethan felt something unexpected bloom through the pain. Purpose. This baby, this tiny, impossible, miraculous baby, was his. Not Damien's, not the company's, not the city's, his, and he would protect it with everything he had. He pressed his hand to his still flat stomach and whispered, I've got you, I promise. And then he got on a bus and left. Chapter 6. 4 years later, time doesn't heal. It numbs. Damien Blackwood stood in his penthouse at 2 a.m., staring at the city below, and thought about the man who had once told him his happy scent smelled like a fire in a fireplace. 4 years since Ethan Calloway had walked out of his office and out of his life. 4 years since the peonies and vanilla and morning rain had faded from his sheets, his clothes, his lungs. 4 years since Damien had discovered the truth about the photographs, Victoria's manipulation, the hired photographer, the carefully staged angles, and had wanted to die. He'd fired Victoria, destroyed her career, cut her out of every deal, every partnership, every network she'd spent decades building. It had been savage and total and utterly insufficient, because none of it brought Ethan back. Ethan was gone. Nana Rose refused to speak to him. Lily, who had confronted him in the lobby of Blackwood Tower, tears streaming down her face, and called him things that would have gotten anyone else escorted out by security, refused to tell him where Ethan had gone. He doesn't want to see you, she'd said, her voice shaking. He doesn't want to ever see you again, and I hope, her voice cracked, I hope you rot. Damien had stood there and taken it, every word, every accusation. Because she was right, he'd hired investigators. Spent hundreds of thousands of dollars tracing financial records, travel documents, phone records. But Ethan had been careful, paid in cash, used to burn a phone, left no digital footprint. He'd vanished like smoke. Damien's penthouse was immaculate, empty, a museum of a life that no longer had meaning. Brutus the cat sat on the kitchen counter, watching him with the cold judgment that only a Maine Coon can deliver. Look at me like that, Damien muttered. Brutus blinked slowly, which in cat language meant you brought this upon yourself. Damien poured himself a whiskey, stared at the amber liquid, thought about freckles and fairy lights and a nest made of velvet. I love you, Ethan had said, standing in the doorway. And I need you to know that what you're doing right now, it's not who you are, it's who your father was. He'd been right about all of it. Damien had become his father, cold, distant, unable to trust, unwilling to love. He'd taken the most precious thing in his life and crushed it with his bare hands, and now he was standing in an empty penthouse at 2 a.m. Talking to a cat. His phone buzzed, a text from Margaret, emergency board meeting tomorrow. The Calloway Foundation is requesting a donation match. They're a small charity based in Cedarville. Damien's hand tightened around his glass. Calloway, it could be a coincidence. The name wasn't unique. There were thousands of Callaways in the country, but his wolf, dormant for 4 years, listless and grieving, lifted its head. Cedarville, he thought, 300 miles north, coastal town. He set down his glass. Margaret, he said into the phone, his voice rough with 4 years of regret. Tell me everything about that foundation. Chapter 7. Discovery. Cedarville was the kind of town that existed in postcards. Clapboard houses, cobblestone streets, a harbor that smelled of salt and cedar and thyme. Damien arrived on a Tuesday morning in a rental car. No driver, no entourage, just a man in a duffel bag and a heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The Callaway Foundation occupied a small office above a bakery on Harbor Street. The sign was hand-painted, flowers and butterflies, cheerful and bright, and through the window Damien could see a small reception area filled with toys and children's books and a banner that read, "Every child deserves a garden." He pushed open the door. A bell chimed, different from the one at Rose and Thorn, higher-pitched, but it hit him with the same force. "Be right with you," called a voice from the back, not Ethan's voice. Higher, brighter. Younger, a woman emerged from a back room, mid-20s, auburn hair in a messy bun, paint on her hands. She had Ethan's freckles. Ethan's eyes, Lily Callaway. She froze, the color drained from her face. Her eyes, so like her brother's, went wide, then hard, then furious. "No," she said. "Lily, no. How did you find? Get out. Not here to cause trouble." Damien's hands were raised, palms out, the universal gesture of surrender. I need to know. He's fine. He's happy. He doesn't need you. I know he doesn't need me, but I need to." Damien's voice cracked. He hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected the raw animal pain that surged up from somewhere deep inside him and turned his careful composure to rubble. "Please, just tell me he's okay." Lily's jaw worked. Her eyes glistened, but the fury on her face was slowly being replaced by something more complicated. Something that looked, against her will, like pity. "He's okay," she said quietly. Is he with someone?" Something flickered in Lily's expression. A shadow, a hesitation. "No," she said. "He's not with anyone." Relief crashed through Damien like a wave, shameful, selfish, desperate. He hated himself for it, hated that the thought of Ethan alone gave him hope when it should have given him grief. "Can I see him?" Damien asked. "No, Lily, please. He's at the park right now." Lily's voice was flat. "Harbor Park, down the street and to the left." "If you go, and I'm not saying you should, if you go, you need to know something." Damien's wolf went very still. "What?" Lily's eyes met his, and in them he saw something that turned his blood to ice. "He's not alone," she said. Harbor Park was small and green, nestled between the waterfront and a row of pastel-colored cottages. There was a playground at its center, slides and swings and a climbing structure shaped like a pirate ship, and on a bench beside it, bathed in late morning sunlight, sat a man. Damien stopped breathing. Ethan. He was thinner. His hair was longer, curling at his shoulders. The freckles were still there, more of them now, as if the sea air had kissed them across his skin. He was wearing a linen shirt and rolled-up jeans, and his feet were bare in the grass, and he was laughing. The sound hit Damien like a physical blow. He hadn't heard that laugh in 4 years, hadn't heard anything warm or bright or alive in 4 years. And hearing it now, directed not at him but at something on the ground in front of him, made his chest constrict so tightly he thought he might be having a heart attack. "Mommy, watch." Damien's world stopped. "Mommy," he looked down, at the source of the small, high-pitched voice, and his knees nearly gave out. 2 children, a boy and a girl. Twins by the look of them, around 3 or 4 years old, with identical dark curls and identical bright eyes and identical expressions of fierce concentration as they attempted to climb the pirate ship. The boy reached the top first and raised his arms in triumph. I did it, Mommy. Good job, Lucas," Ethan called, clapping. "Aria, you're almost there, baby." The girl, Aria, had freckles, Ethan's freckles, scattered across her nose like cinnamon, and the boy, Lucas, had dark eyes. Almost black, Damien's eyes. The ground opened beneath Damien's feet. The world tilted sideways. His vision tunneled until all he could see were those 2 children, his children, laughing and climbing and alive, and his. "Can I help you?" The voice came from beside him. An older woman, 60s, silver-haired, stern-eyed, had appeared at his elbow. She was carrying a thermos and a blanket, and she looked at Damien with the careful assessment of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people. Damien couldn't form words. He was staring at the children. At Ethan, at the life that had grown and bloomed and flourished in his absence, nurtured by love and sunlight and the gentle, steady hands of the man he'd thrown away. "Those are his children," the woman said, following his gaze. Her voice was not unkind. "Ethan's, and before you ask, they don't have a father." Damien's throat closed. They were conceived in love," the woman said firmly, "and they were raised in love. And if you're here to disrupt that, I'm their father." The words came out of him like something torn from the root, raw, desperate, true. The woman stared at him. Her eyes, sharp, blue, ancient, searched his face. Then they dropped to his hands, which were shaking, to his jaw, which was clenched so tight his teeth ached, to his eyes, which were burning with 4 years of regret and a lifetime of pain. "The one who broke his heart," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Damien whispered. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed, a deep, tired, compassionate sigh, and said, "I'm Great Aunt Marin, and you're going to need to sit down." Chapter 8. Father. A conversation happened on the bench. Great Aunt Marin sat beside him and told him everything. The pregnancy, the morning sickness that lasted 5 months, the way Ethan had worked 2 jobs to save money for the twins. The birth complicated, scary 36 hours of labor that had left Ethan pale and exhausted and radiant when they placed 2 tiny, screaming Barbies in his arms. Lucas came first, Maren said, her voice softening. Loud as a siren, wouldn't stop crying until Ethan held him. Then Arya, quiet, watchful, she just looked at him, like she was memorizing his face. Damien couldn't speak. His eyes were fixed on the playground, where Ethan was now pushing both children on the swings, Lucas shrieking with delight, Arya leaning forward with her arms outstretched like she was trying to fly. He named the foundation after your shared love of flowers, Maren continued. Did you know that? The Callaway Foundation provides gardens and green spaces for children in foster care. He wanted to give them something beautiful, something permanent. Damien's hands were clenched in his lap so tightly that his knuckles were white. He never stopped loving you, Maren said quietly. He tried, Lord knows he tried, but the children, your children, look at him every day with your eyes and every day he sees you. Damien's voice was barely a whisper. Does he hate me? Maren considered this. He did, for a long time, but hate is heavy and Ethan has never been one for carrying burdens. Now I think he's just tired of missing you. Something inside Damien cracked. The last wall, the final defense. 4 years of carefully maintained distance and professional detachment and whiskey at 2 a.m. and empty penthouses and I'm fine, Margaret, I'm fine, all of it shattered like glass, and what was left underneath was just a man. A broken, terrified, desperate man who had thrown away the love of his life and spent every moment since trying not to drown in the knowing. He pressed his palms against his eyes. His shoulders shook. Have to tell him you're here, Maren said, placing a hand on his arm. He deserves to know, Damien nodded. He couldn't speak. Maren stood, walked to the swings, said something in Ethan's ear. Ethan turned, their eyes met across the park, and in Ethan's face, across the distance of 4 years and 1,000 heartbreaks, Damien saw everything. The love, the pain, the anger, the longing, the fear, and beneath it all, still burning, still stubborn, still alive, hope. The first meeting was not a reunion. It was a reckoning. Ethan sent the children home with Maren. Walked across the park, stood in front of the bench where Damien sat and looked down at him with those impossible autumn eyes and said, you have 10 minutes. Damien stood. He was taller than Ethan always had been, but standing in front of him now he felt small, exposed, stripped of every armor he'd ever built. Ethan, don't. Ethan held up a hand. Don't say my name like that, like you have the right. You're right, I don't. What you came to say. Damien took a breath, and then another. And then he said the thing he should have said 4 years ago. I was wrong, about everything. The photos, the jealousy, the rejection, there is no excuse. There is no explanation. I was a coward and a fool and I became the worst version of myself and you suffered for it. Ethan's jaw was tight, his eyes were bright, he didn't speak. I found out about the photos 3 months after you left, Damien continued. Victoria staged them, all of them. She hired a photographer to follow you and your cousin and frame it as, I know, Damien blinked. I figured it out pretty quickly. Alex was the only alpha I was seeing at the time, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. Then why didn't you come back? Ethan's voice was sharp. Come back to the man who rejected me without a single question, who believed the worst of me without even asking. He shook his head. I had more self-respect than that. The words landed like blows. Damien absorbed them, accepted them, deserved them. And then I found out about the Barbies, Ethan said, his voice dropping. And I knew that I couldn't come back, because if I did you would have found out. And the idea of you being in their lives, not because you loved me, but because you felt obligated. His voice broke. He pressed his lips together. I couldn't do that to them. I would have loved them, Damien whispered. I do love them. Never even spoken to them, and I love them so much it's, don't. Ethan's voice was a knife. Don't you dare say that. You don't get to walk into their lives and, I know I don't. Damien was shaking. He could feel it, the tremor in his hands, the tremor in his voice, the tremor in his wolf who was packing and whining and begging to be near their mate. But I'm here, Ethan, and I'm begging for a chance. Not to make it up to you, not to fix what I broke. Just to be near you, to prove that I can be better, that I'm not. He stopped, swallowed, that I'm not my father. Ethan stared at him, his eyes were glistening, his lips were trembling, his scent, a hurricane of love and pain and fury and hope, swirled between them like a storm. I need time, Ethan said finally. Take all the time you need. I mean it, you don't get to rush this, you don't get to throw money at it or send flowers or, I won't. You don't get to meet the children, not yet. Not until I'm sure. Okay, if you hurt them. Ethan's voice dropped to something fierce and dangerous, something that had nothing to do with Omega softness and everything to do with a mother's, a parent's unbreakable love. If you hurt one hair on their heads, Damien Blackwood, I will end you. I don't care how much money you have. Damien almost smiled. Almost. I believe you. Ethan held his gaze for one more moment, then he turned and walked away. And Damien stood in the park in Cedarville, 300 miles from his penthouse and his company and his empty life, and watched the love of his world walk away from him again. But this time he had hope. Chapter 9. Small things. The visit started small. Damien rented a cottage in Cedarville. Not his penthouse style, simple, whitewashed, a 10-minute walk from Ethan's house. He attended board meetings remotely, delegated everything non-essential, and spent his mornings sitting on his porch, watching the sea and trying to remember how to be a person instead of a corporation. Ethan let him come to dinner, once a week, then twice, then 3 times. The first dinner was agonizing. Ethan cooked pasta, because of course he did, and they sat at his small kitchen table and made awkward conversation while Damien tried not to stare at the children's drawings on the refrigerator and the tiny shoes by the door and the high chairs that proved his Barbies were real and alive. And here, Lucas and Arya were not in the room. Ethan had been very clear about that. Dinner first, we'll see. The second dinner, Ethan allowed the door to the living room to remain open. Damien caught glimpses of the twins, Lucas building a tower of blocks, Arya coloring in a book, and his chest ached so badly he had to put down his fork. The third dinner, Lucas wandered into the kitchen. He was holding a stuffed dinosaur, a green T-Rex with one eye, and he looked up at Damien with those dark, dark eyes and said, "Who are you?" Damien's heart stopped. He looked at Ethan, who was gripping the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his expression a war between fear and hope. "I'm Damien," he said, his voice carefully gentle. "I'm a friend of Ethan's. I'm Lucas." The boy held up the dinosaur. "This is Mr. Rex. He lost his eye in a battle with the vacuum cleaner." Damien's lips twitched. "That's a worthy adversary." Lucas studied him with the unnerving intensity of a child who was deciding whether to trust or dismiss. Then he climbed onto the chair beside Damien and said, "Do you like dinosaurs?" "I do." "Do you like T-Rexes best?" "I think T-Rexes are excellent." Lucas nodded, satisfied, because Mr. Rex doesn't like people who like Triceratops. Noted. From across the kitchen, Ethan let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for months. Arya took longer. She was the quiet one, the watcher. She observed Damien from a distance, hiding behind Ethan's legs, peering around doorframes, studying him with those sharp, dark eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Damien understood. He was an alpha she didn't know, a stranger with a scent that was familiar in a way she couldn't explain, which was probably more unsettling than if he'd smelled like nothing at all. He didn't push. He showed up. He was consistent. He played dinosaurs with Lucas on the living room floor and helped Ethan with the dishes and sat quietly in the garden while the children played, and he waited. It was Arya who came to him. He was sitting on the porch steps, watching Lucas chase a butterfly when he felt a small presence at his side. He looked down. Arya was standing there, clutching a crayon drawing, her lower lip between her teeth. "Hi," Damien said softly. She held up the drawing. It was a picture of a house, Ethan's house, recognizable by the blue door and the garden full of flowers. There were 4 figures standing in front of it, 1 tall, 1 medium, 2 small. "This is Mommy," Arya said, pointing to the medium figure. "And this is me, and this is Lucas." She pointed to the tall figure. "And this is nobody, just a person." Damien's eyes burned. "That's a beautiful drawing." "You can have it," she said. "If you want." "I want," he whispered. "Thank you, Arya." She nodded once, decisive, serious, and walked back inside. Damien held the drawing like it was made of gold. Chapter 10. Exposure. Victoria Sterling was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat. 4 years after Damien had dismantled her career, she had rebuilt, smaller, meaner, more dangerous. She'd found new allies, new investors, new leverage. And she'd spent those 4 years watching Damien's decline, the drinking, the isolation, the slow erosion of the empire he'd built, with the grim satisfaction of someone who believed that if she couldn't have him, no one could. When she discovered he'd gone to Cedarville, when she discovered the children, something inside her snapped for the final time. The letter arrived at Ethan's house on a Saturday morning. No return address, no signature, just a single sheet of paper with a single paragraph. "You think he loves you. He's there for the children, not for you. Once he has custody, he'll discard you just like he did before. You were always beneath him. You always will be." Ethan read it twice, set it on the kitchen counter. Made himself a cup of tea. His hands were shaking. He knew that the letter was poison. Knew it was designed to destabilize, to destroy the fragile trust he'd been building with Damien, to rip open wounds that were only just beginning to heal. But poison works because it contains a kernel of truth. And the kernel, the tiny, buried, terrifying kernel, was the question he'd been asking himself since Damien arrived in Cedarville. Why is he really here? He brought the letter to Damien that evening. Damien read it. His face went white, then red, then a shade of fury so dark and so absolute that Ethan actually took a step back. "This is Victoria," Damien said, his voice low and vibrating with barely contained rage. "This is her handwriting, her phrasing, her poison. She's been trying to destroy me for years, and now she's targeting you." Damien's hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the effort of restraining his alpha instincts, which were screaming at him to find Victoria Sterling and end this. "I need to make a call." He called Margaret, then his lawyers, then when the situation demanded it, his security team. The investigation took 3 days. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Victoria hadn't just sent the letter. She'd been tracking Damien for months. She'd hired private investigators to follow him to Cedarville. She had photographs of the children, of Lucas and Arya, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, and she had a plan. A detailed written plan to file for emergency custody of the twins on Damien's behalf, using fabricated evidence of parental neglect, with the intention of gaining access to the children, and through them, to Damien's fortune and company. When Damien saw the plan, the emails, the bank transfers, the hired lawyers, he sat in the cottage in Cedarville and stared at the wall for a very long time. She was going to take them from you, he said to Ethan, his voice hollow. She was going to take our children. Ethan was sitting across from him, his face pale, his arms wrapped around himself. But she didn't. Tried. You stopped her. Damien looked at him. Ethan, you stopped her, Ethan repeated, and his voice was different now, softer, warmer, threaded with something that sounded dangerously like trust. You came here, you've been patient, you've been kind. You've played dinosaurs and accepted crayon drawings and let a 3-year-old decide what your favorite dinosaur is. And when someone threatened us, all of us, you didn't hesitate. Damien's throat was tight. I would burn the world for them. I know. Ethan paused. I know you would. Silence between them was different than before, not the heavy, aching silence of grief and distance. Something lighter, something with space in it for breath, for hope, for the first tentative steps toward forgiveness. Not ready to trust you completely, Ethan said. Not yet, I understand. I'm ready to try. Damien closed his eyes, breathed in. Let Ethan's scent, peonies and vanilla and the sea air of Cedarville, fill his lungs for the first time in 4 years. Thank you, he whispered. Chapter 11. Forgiveness. A press conference was held at Blackwood Tower, not because Damien wanted the spectacle, because the investigation had become public and the media was circling, and the only way to protect Ethan and the children was to get ahead of the story. He stood at the podium in the building's main auditorium, behind a forest of microphones, and addressed a room full of reporters with the same cool composure that had built an empire. 4 years ago, he began, I made the worst mistake of my life. Room went silent. I was given the gift of the most extraordinary person I have ever known, a person who was gentle and kind and brave and everything I was not, and I threw that gift away because I was too afraid to trust it, too afraid to trust him. He paused. His composure held, but only barely. I was manipulated by someone I trusted. Victoria Sterling fabricated evidence of infidelity and used it to drive a wedge between me and my mate. She did this out of jealousy and greed, and when that wasn't enough, she escalated to threats against my children. Murmur through the room was electric. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. I am standing here today not as a CEO, not as an alpha, but as a father who missed the first steps, the first words. The first 3 years of his children's lives because he was too proud and too broken to admit he was wrong. His voice cracked. He let it. Oh, a debt I can never fully repay. To my children who deserved better. To their mother, who is the strongest, most extraordinary person I have ever known. And to a woman named Nana Rose who once told me that love isn't about deserving, it's about choosing. He looked directly into the camera. I'm choosing to be better. I'm choosing to be present. I'm choosing to spend the rest of my life earning the trust I once took for granted. And if the world wants to judge me for my mistakes, he straightened. Let them. I'm done running. Ethan watched the press conference from Nana Rose's kitchen in Ashford, with the twins on his lap and his grandmother beside him. He was crying, not the broken, heaving sobs of 4 years ago. Quiet tears, warm, slow, cleansing, that slid down his cheeks and landed on Lucas's dark curls. Mommy's crying, Arya observed. I know, baby. It a happy cry or a sad cry? Ethan pressed his lips to the top of his daughter's head, breathed in, let the scent of his children, warm and sweet and safe, fill the space where the pain used to be. Happy, he said. I think it's a happy cry. Nana Rose, who had been watching the broadcast with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable, reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand. He's not his father, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her. How can you be so sure? Because his father would never have stood in front of a room full of people and admitted he was wrong. She smiled, a small, wise, knowing smile. That takes a kind of courage that money can't buy. Chapter 12. Renewal. The mate bond ceremony was held in Ethan's garden in Cedarville, not at Blackwood Tower, not at a 5-star hotel, not at any of the grand impersonal venues that Damien's money could have provided. In the garden, Ethan's garden, with its wildflowers and fairy lights and the small wooden bench where they had sat so many times, watching the children play, Nana Rose officiated. She wore her best dress, cornflower blue, and read from a passage she'd written herself, about roots and growth and the stubborn, beautiful persistence of love. The twins were flower children. Lucas wore a tiny bow tie and carried a basket of petals, which he threw with the enthusiasm of a boy who understood that his primary job was maximum chaos. Arya wore a crown of daisies and carried her crayon drawing, the one with 4 figures in front of the house, and presented it to Damien with the solemnity of a judge delivering a verdict. Damien knelt down and took the drawing with both hands. This is the most important document I've ever received, he said. More important than any contract, any merger, any deal. Lucas tugged on his sleeve. More important than dinosaurs. Damien looked at his son, his dark-eyed, loud, magnificent son, and smiled. More important than dinosaurs. Wow, Lucas breathed. Ethan laughed, that impossible laugh, and Damien stood and faced his mate. Ethan was beautiful. He was wearing a simple linen suit, and his hair was loose around his shoulders, and his freckles stood out like constellations against his sun-kissed skin. His scent, peonies and vanilla, and the salt air of Cedarville, wrapped around Damien like a benediction. Hi, Ethan said. Hi, Damien whispered. Ready? Been ready for 4 years. Longer than that, Ethan corrected, smiling. You just didn't know it. They clasped hands. Nana Rose spoke the words of the bond, ancient, sacred, binding, and when she reached the part about the bite, Damien looked at Ethan with a question in his eyes. Ethan nodded. Damien leaned in. His lips brushed the curve of Ethan's neck, his scent gland, throbbing with warmth and life, and he bit down. Gently, reverently, with the careful precision of a man who understood that he was being given something he had no right to, and who intended to spend every remaining moment of his life honoring it. The bond snapped into place. Ethan gasped. His hands flew to Damien's shoulders. Connection between them, electric, warm, alive, hummed with a frequency that only mates could feel, a vibration that said, I am yours, you are mine, we are bound, we are home. And then Damien kissed him, not the tentative, questioning kiss of strangers in a park, not the desperate, starving kiss of lovers in a nest, a different kiss, a new kiss, the first kiss of the rest of their lives, slow and deep and achingly tender, full of everything they'd lost and everything they'd found and everything they would build together. The twins, sensing the gravity of the moment, were quiet for approximately 4 seconds, then Lucas shouted, They're kissing, gross, and Arya sighed with the weary patience of a woman who had seen too much. They're married, Lucas, it's allowed. The garden erupted in laughter. Nana Rose wiped her eyes. Lily, who had arrived the day before, bearing flowers and a grudging apology for being slightly less hostile than before, raised a glass of champagne. Great Aunt Marin smiled the satisfied smile of a woman who had always known how this story would end. And in the center of it all, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights, and the people who loved them, Damien and Ethan stood forehead to forehead, breathing each other in, the bond humming between them like a living thing. Love you, Damien whispered. I know, Ethan said. I always knew, even when I was terrible, especially when you were terrible. Ethan pressed his palm to Damien's cheek, because even then, even at your worst, you smelled like home. Morning, 2 years later, the house in Cedarville had expanded. What had once been a modest cottage was now a sprawling, sun-drenched home with a wraparound porch, a garden that spilled over with flowers, and a backyard that contained one pirate ship play structure, one sandbox, one Maine Coon cat, Brutus, relocated and indignant, and approximately 47 plastic dinosaurs. Ethan stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, and watched the morning unfold. Lucas was in the sandbox, building a castle with the focused intensity of his father. He was 5 now, tall for his age, with Damien's dark eyes and Ethan's stubborn streak, and a voice that could be heard from 3 houses away. Arya was on the porch, curled in a rocking chair with a book. She was quieter than her brother, more observant, more thoughtful, but when she smiled, which was increasingly often, it transformed her face into something luminous. She had Ethan's freckles and Damien's dark curls and a wisdom that seemed far too large for her small body. Daddy. Lucas shouted from the sandbox. Dad, come look. Damien emerged from the house, barefoot, coffee-stained t-shirt, hair uncombed, looking nothing like a billionaire CEO and everything like a father who had been up since 5 a.m. building a castle. You got, buddy. It's a T-Rex fortress, with a moat. That's incredible. Does Mr. Rex approve? Lucas held up the stuffed dinosaur, which now had its eye surgically reattached, thanks to Nana Rose's sewing skills, and consulted it with the gravity of a general seeking counsel. Mr. Rex says it needs a flag, Lucas announced. A flag, absolutely. Damien sat down in the sandbox, his expensive linen pants be damned, and began helping his son construct a flag from a stick and a piece of cloth. Ethan watched them from the window, and the love that filled his chest was so vast and so deep that it felt like the sea. He looked down. Arya had appeared at his side, her book abandoned, her dark eyes serious. Yes, baby, I had a dream last night, me about it. Daddy was in it, and he was pushing us on the swings, and you were laughing. She paused, and the flowers were singing. Singing what? I don't remember, but it was a happy song. Ethan knelt down and pulled his daughter into his arms. She was warm and solid and smelled like sunshine and the lavender soap she insisted on using, and he held her close and breathed her in and felt the bond between them. The mate bond, the parent bond, the bond of family, humming with a contentment so deep it was almost physical. Love you, Arya, he whispered. I know, she said, with the calm certainty of a child who had never once doubted it. Then she pulled back and looked at him. Can I have pancakes? Ethan laughed. You can have pancakes. With chocolate chips. Go ask your father. Arya ran to the door. Daddy, Mama says I can have chocolate chip pancakes. She does she? Damien appeared in the doorway, Lucas perched on his shoulders. He looked at Ethan with those dark, beautiful eyes, no longer cold, no longer guarded, but warm and open and full of a love so fierce it took Ethan's breath away. Chocolate chip pancakes it is. I want sprinkles, Lucas announced. You can have sprinkles and chocolate chips if you promise to eat actual food too. Children disappeared into the kitchen in a whirlwind of excitement. Damien crossed the room to Ethan, slid his arms around his waist and pulled him close. Morning, he murmured against Ethan's temple. Morning, sleep well. Brutus was on my face again. That cat has no boundaries. Learned it from you. Damien laughed, that devastating laugh that still made Ethan's knees weak after 2 years of marriage and 6 years of history, and pressed his forehead against Ethan's. Thank you, he said. What? For this, for them, for another morning. Ethan leaned into him. Let his scent, cedar smoke and whiskey and something new, something warm and golden that was just family, wrap around him like a blanket. Every morning, Ethan whispered, for the rest of our lives. Outside, the sun climbed over Cedarville, painting the rooftops in gold and rose. The harbor glittered, the seagulls called. And in a house by the sea, 2 men who had once been broken stood in their kitchen, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter and the smell of pancakes and the steady, unbreakable hum of a bond that had survived rejection, betrayal, distance, and time, and was stronger for it, for everyone who ever loved someone who hurt them, and for everyone brave enough to love again.